Okay, in this video I'm going to talk about participle phrases. Now this participle here can also be referred to as participial phrases, but I choose to use participle because it rolls off the tongue a little more easily. Okay, so what are they exactly? Well, a phrase that acts as an adjective and using an ing ending. So it's a phrase that acts as an adjective and uses the verbal, the gerund that ends in ing. Let's take a look. The fans, comma, jumping up and down, cheered on the home team. Now, in this case, we have this participle phrase. It begins with the gerund, but this is not a gerund phrase, which comes up next. The reason this is not a gerund phrase is because we are describing a noun. If we are describing a noun, we are using a participle phrase. Here we're describing the fans. What are they doing? They're jumping up and down. Now this participle phrase can also be moved to the front of the sentence the way it is here. Jumping up and down, the fans cheered on the home team to victory. You'll notice in both cases I use commas. Here I set off this phrase, and this is a non-essential phrase, so the fans cheered on the home team is fine. We could get rid of this information and not really be confused as to who the fans are. But in terms of participle phrase land, we leave it in here because it tells us something about the fans. In the second case, in B, we have the comma right there, jumping up and down, comma, the fans. In this case, the participle phrase comes before the noun, and the noun should always follow the comma. So it's clear that we're referring to the fans. And we're going to learn a little bit more about this, or if you want to already jump ahead, you can go to misplaced modifiers to see what happens when we put the wrong participle phrase, or the wrong noun, rather, next to a participle phrase. Here, everything is fine, though. So let's go on to the next two. Now, very similar sentences, but there's an important difference. Let's read the first one. During the boxing match, Bobby punched his opponent, comma, swinging wildly. Now, this is a participle phrase, and this is a participle phrase. In fact, the sentences are exactly the same, except, well, punched an opponent, his opponent, doesn't really matter, but there's a bigger difference, and it's the comma. There is no comma there. But how could that make a difference? Well, let's look at C. During the boxing match, Bobby punched his opponent, comma, swinging wildly. When there's a comma there, between the last word and a participle phrase that happens at the end of a sentence. Now, we're not talking about participle phrases in the beginning of the sentence the way we were a minute ago, but at the very end. When a participle phrase happens at the very end and it's separated by a comma, it does not refer to this. It refers to the subject of the sentence. Who was swinging wildly? Who is the subject of the sentence? And the answer is Bobby. Bobby had punched his opponent, swinging wildly, comma, screaming loudly, etc., etc. You could add a bunch of participle phrases, but because of this comma, they all refer to Bobby. Now let's look at D. During the boxing match, comma, Bobby punched an opponent, swinging wildly. Now, there is no comma, and so therefore, the participle phrase refers to the word that came directly before it. So there's no comma. You can think of it as this little touch rule. These two words here are touching, therefore participle phrase refers to opponent. And so Bobby wasn't swinging wildly, it was the opponent. Regardless, though, these are both participle phrases. They begin with a gerund, and they both describe nouns. In C, they describe Bobby, and in D, the opponent.